Thank you. So we're going to make this a bit interactive because, and I think the previous panel, Russell, I think stole our thunder because we have all this planned and then we talking about AI and payments. So my name is Nitin. I was here yesterday, and I am the global head of digital asset and technology design at State Street Bank. But also, prior to that, I was at IBM. I was lead for mobile payments. So I spent almost a decade in payment industry. Got into blockchain, and I'm happy to sort of share some of that experience and how AI was not just a panacea, it was a necessity for me as I was building payment network. So with that, I'd like to introduce Russell. Russell was my client, very animated. We would get lost in quantum and all kinds of tech, so he's quite interesting person. I'd love to have you introduce yourself, Russell.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Russell Moore. I'm head of strategy and development for Global Payments, one of the largest financial institutions in the world. And my focus now is on Gen AI, as I'm sure all of yours is. Who in here has actually used generative AI? Raise your hand. Let me see. Who is actually using it right now? Is anybody? Are you using it right now? No.
No one?
You should be, right? Yep, okay. So.
Awesome. No, that's great. And so one thing, your previous panel had an amazing conversation in terms of the landscape. How many of you actually understand? Because AI is seen as the magic box. It's seen as like, okay, now we have AI, we can do all these things. And we then begin to have use cases, which is a common thing, fintech, and consultants who bring in and say, hey, you can do all these things. We talk about, and I talk about AI, prior to coming to this, I actually asked ChatGPT to list things we could do with AI and payments, and it gave me a dozen things that we could do. So the question that I have for you before we go is, and we'll get into a conversation, how many of you fully get it? How many fully understand what is the context here? Are we using AI as a buzzword? Are we using AI as something that's cool that we need to think about and do something about it? Or how many of you fully get it to say, hey, I know exactly what I need to do with AI? A show of hand would be great. How many of you don't have a clue? It's fine to be okay with it. That's great. So I think the rest of you at least have an idea of where we're going with this. So Russell, help us simplify for the audience this entire landscape. I mean, AI is not a black box. It's not a magic thing. It requires a lot of maintenance. It has a lot of cost effectiveness analysis that needs to be done. So since you work for Global Payments, one of the largest payment processors in the world, what is your perspective and purview of how you view this technology as something that can change the landscape and something that can revolutionize the way we do payments?
So it's a great question because it's my opinion, and I want your feedback on this opinion, that generative AI, which is what we're talking about, not just AI, and I can explain the difference between those, but generative AI will touch and change the lives of every human on the planet. What do you think about that?
I'll pause and I'll reflect on that. I actually did my education was in AI, and I think generative AI will, for better or for worse, is that the question you're asking me?
No, it's going to be for better.
For better?
Yeah, it's for better.
So I'm reserving my support for that at the moment, only because I think in general, as I think the previous panel was talking about it, the output of the generative AI is not fully understood, both in terms of accuracy, both in terms of, and I still think that there's instinct, which as humans, so that if you're suggesting, Russell, that we can use this as an avenue to augment our thinking, then I would agree with that. But if you're expecting us to replace the human instinct and the human sense of doing things and holding people accountable, then I would pause on that front.
Absolutely agree. So a lot of times when we speak about generative AI and the difference between traditional AI, which we've been doing for years and years, and before that it was data analytics, and this is a progression of that, the true difference is generative AI is creative. It can create on its own, and that's the game changer. So if you look at before generative AI came out, really in the popularity of it in the last 8 months to 12 months. Before that, you had to have a vast knowledge of how to program, how to ingest data, how to take that data and from a raw state and put it in where a machine could actually learn from it. And the huge difference now is that the algorithms that we use, which are large language models, and basically think of it from a perspective of you are feeding it the internet or you are feeding it massive amounts of information, and that allows for that AI model to correlate other information at its simplest. It's like the world's best autocorrect is what it is at its simplest, because guessing the next thing that you're going to put in there. That's what it's doing. It's able to correlate this in vast amounts, and that's really the main difference it can create. Generative AI is creative on its own.
But then two things to this, right? One is help our audience understand, before we get into generative AI and technicality of that, and you're absolutely right, hence the term generative AI. It's generating some content, whether the content is meant for decision-making purposes or the content is meant to feed another sort of module that's feeding all this AI. But help them understand, what do we need to factor in for quote unquote an AI strategy? So if you're a fintech or you're a payment company, there's a vast amount of, the discipline itself is huge. So if you just take AI, it's a broad term. You have machine learning, you have large language models, you have generative AI, you have analytics. All these are combined into this big thing called AI. How do you discern between, is there a classification system that you can say, I'm going to use the neural networks for doing this, or I can use, and I'm throwing a few terms out there, I just want sort of you to highlight as to how do the small and large enterprise alike, including AI could be a business as a fintech. How do you approach that into an AI strategy? And more importantly, I think, is that if you're a fintech who's looking into using AI to solve a problem, how do you fit into that model into a large client strategy? Because you cannot build something in vacuum and expect a client to adopt it without fully understanding their AI strategy. So it becomes an interesting sort of conundrum for small and large corporations alike.
For sure. And first of all, generative AI and AI in general is not a magic button. You're not going to just push a button. It's going to do exactly what you want it to do. The large language models that we have today, they have this vast knowledge, and you can ask it really good questions and get really good feedback. But from a perspective of how you build it out, you're going to have models just as you do today that are very specific to solve specific problems. And the more specific you can get, the better and faster it is at solving those problems. So, and generative AI is not a one-stop solution either, right? So they are built on these other progressive models that we've had around for years. And as you build these things out, keeping in mind that there are new regulatory aspects that are coming out, and you have to take, this technology is one of the first ones that really has an ethical dilemma behind it. How many people in the audience, show of hands please, when you hear Gen AI, you think, oh, it's going to take my job, it's Terminator, it's the machine coming for us. I mean, anybody think that right now? Dale back there? It's not, right? It is not. Gen AI and AI is a tool. And you can use the tool for good, just like a hammer, nails with it, or you can hit knitting with it, right? It's a tool. And if you approach it from that perspective of, this is another tool in my tool belt to solve problems. You never do innovation for innovation's sake. You always have a business perspective around it. Or what would that say as a business value owner? Meaning you can go back to someone as you're deploying these Gen AI and AI models and say, hey, what is it that you're trying to achieve? What problem are you trying to solve? And then you can go back to that business owner and say, yep, we achieved that. And yes, it solved my problems. That for me is the first step.
So I'll give you a story. As my question was, how to devise a strategy. And when I was at IBM towards the last 2 years before I moved to State Street, I was looking and thinking about future of finance. And in that context, I was also building a payment network using blockchain, only because we were looking into, the previous panel talked about FedNow, we talked about RTP. There's a real-time payment system in every country, and we're a little behind because we have the burden of legacy. But when you look into real-time movement of money, I was trying to understand is what else do you need with that? If you're moving the money in real time, you need to have risk analysis in real time. You need to have fraud analysis in real time. You need to ensure that you have fraud detection in real time. And all kinds of other functions that feed into treasury management, cash management functions. It's because you're moving money in real time. And when we move into this whole, which is what I was touching upon yesterday's panel, was you trying to tokenize fiat movement of money per se. You cannot possibly do that with existing systems. So to me, AI became a need to say, I need to have the same speed. I need to have, and so then I went down the path of saying, okay, fine, how do I position this as a technologist to say, I'm building these rails, I'm building these real-time systems, and AI is a necessity. So we went down the path of figuring out as to what do we do, and essentially it boils down to a slew of technologies, whether you call it neural networks or you call them sort of advanced analytics or large language models. But large language models are more towards a search function, and you're being able to interface with these systems. But the question then became is, how do I address the investment needed, and how do I address the massive amounts of data and then deal with things like data privacy, and eventually boils out two things, is connecting the dots and finding the patterns. I have to figure out all the dots that are actually happening in terms of transaction volumes, transaction processing, and how do I find patterns, whether the patterns is for fraud detection or pattern is for me to find out centrality analysis, to find which node or which particular client is the most valuable client for me. All the things that the previous panel talked about. So I went down the path to say, I definitely need AI, but then how do I convince, one, us to build it? Second thing is, how do I convince a bank to use it? And that's where the conversation was on strategy. And most large financial institutions, I'm sure many of you work for one or work with one, no one really has a strategy. They have some skunk work project, and I think AI is way beyond those skunk work projects and side projects. And so I think we are down this path now, and I'd love to hear your thoughts if you disagree with this. I think the first step is to be able to understand the raw material. What happens to the data? Do I trust the data? Is the data mine? Can I use the data in these models that I need to train? And over time, just like anything else, our knowledge gets old, models get old, they get decayed. So we have to maintain and update these things. The question then becomes, is this notion of explainable AI and trust, do I trust the AI model? And if I don't trust it, is it really solving my problems? Is it making a decision on my behalf? So none of the strategic elements are really resolved by most financial institutions. And I think that's where we are at the moment. The question then becomes is, again, are we focusing on technology first, or do we actually have a plan of action of using AI? I don't know if that resonates with you all, but love to, I'll take a pause here. Want this to be interactive. Please tell me if this makes sense, or ask questions that you may want to add to this before we go on to the next segment. I'll take a pause. Questions, comments? Wow, not a single question.
Ask AI.
Ask AI.
Yeah, who's got Claude
ask AI.
or ChatGPT? Ask.
No, but feel free to raise your hand and keep it interactive. The second thing is AI and payments in general, Russell. You're serving some of the largest clients in the world, right? And is the need coming from them to your business? Or do you anticipate the need to serve the Bank of Americas of the world, or to serve the Capital One of the world? To say, we're going to provide these services to make you more efficient. Whether it's making, if I'm, what's in my wallet, and if it's Capital One, then are you powering the entire fraud detection modules behind the scenes? Is that a requirement from the clients? Or are you anticipating these things? How are you dealing with it? And where's the investment rubric? How do you make an investment? Because it's a massive investment that goes into it.
So I think our leadership has come to the conclusion that yes, it is going to be needed. And this will give you an advantage to begin with, and then it'll become table stakes as you move forward. And really, if you think of it from a process of automation and optimization, and it just keeps going back and forth, and then you can justify and quantify it's 1% automated or it's 100% automated. But optimization is different. So once you ingest these tools, the more as new tools come out or new models come out, the optimization goes up and up. So it's always, the bar is getting higher and higher. And when you optimize to a certain extent, that gives you an advantage. I don't know if you've heard, but one of the big use cases is there's all this tech debt and legacy. You have legacy code. Some of the other gentlemen on the last panel mentioned it. And it's very good, especially if you have a model trained specifically to convert different types of tech. It's really, really good at that. And it can give you can take a 1X coder. Does everybody know what a 1X coder is? A 1X coder is somebody that just come out of college and has very little experience. And then you have a 10X coder. Ganesh is a 10X coder from Relevance. And what that is a person who has experience and knowledge and is able to give that. What generative AI can do is take a 1X coder and turn them into a 10X coder. But the problem that it has, it doesn't give you the 25 years of experience. So as you code ethically, that's one of the things about Gen AI is there's this huge ethic component. It's going to take my job. No, it's not. It's going to do all these other things. It's going to take over the world. And very rarely do you hear about technologies like that. Another one would be like the nuclear bomb, right? You can use it for good, for power, and then you can use it for destruction. But it's the optimization piece is so powerful that if you're not moving forward with that in mind, it's going to be very difficult for you to compete in the future. So as every company out there starts pulling in Gen AI to optimize their employees internally, and then to help them come to conclusions of new product, because that's what it's good at, right? You put all this information in there and you say, hey, tell me what I don't know about this. And it's like, here you go. Here's 10 things you didn't know about it.
So from technology perspective, right, you have some new winners. You have NVIDIA, and NVIDIA was a chip-making company. Now they're big in terms of the specific chipsets that you need. So these are some of the technical elements where you have massive data processing because data feeds into AI. The learning happens just like us. We have to read a bunch of books to understand the world around us. AI model is no different, right? And this whole holy grail of getting into general AI, which is AI behaving like me and you talking to you and be able to respond in context switch.
And be creative.
I can switch now. We can talk about what's happening in Ukraine, and you'll switch the context and have this conversation that we're having. So there's a whole amount of investment that needs to go into it. So you have new players. You have new OpenAI and OpenAI related ecosystem. Every day you have. How do you navigate through that? I mean, you have now apps that talk about other apps. Are we getting into this crazy world where suddenly now it's full-time work to keep up with all these tools that are emerging around us, and then to discern between what's real and what's not? And how do you make an investment decision? Like, for example, while all this is good and cool, and we are like getting enamored with all these functions, whether it's looking into creating generative art or looking into creating logos, and you have all these models. But then, how do you make an investment decision as a client to say, this is how I would have to make investment into XYZ, because all this is quite expensive. OpenAI is quite expensive behind the scenes, as they've discussed, and they went to the payment model, which is going to be no different for a payment company of your size to make that investment in infrastructure, in hardware, to process this massive amounts of data, and to keep it secure. What's your thinking around that?
So it's no different than how we invest today. I mean, you take a new technology, and you put it in, and then you have to quantify it. You have a business case built around it. This is no different. This is nothing new from that perspective. Does it solve the problem that I want to solve, or am I using it for just to use Gen AI's sake, which you never want to have? And then you identify the problem, have a very specific problem that you want to solve, and quantifiable outcome. So when you do your POC, was it good at doing this, or was it bad at doing this, and can you quantify it? And that's really no different than having any other product today.
So I have another question for you on this front. You talked about the fact about people threatened of losing the jobs and everything else, and being insecure about that stuff. I would imagine that this AI modeling and the AI landscape, whether it's data curation or whether it's having library of modules and models and consistently training it, and keeping an eye and having a governance framework around what happens to these models, you're creating new roles, you're creating new jobs, you're creating somebody who actually understands the space to actually have an overview on these things, to make the right decisions. Yep. Because these decisions can be expensive, both in terms of making the wrong decisions, causing client issues, and eventually having regulatory issues around fines, which is where I think the notion of trusted AI and explainable AI is popping up to say, are you able to explain these decisions? And while you're automating, you use the word automation, and while you're using AI to automate a few things, should you be able to take a pause and be able to reflect on those automation functions and do these things? So I would think that you have while you maybe you're taking this 1x to 10x example, and Ganesh Ram certainly is 10x coder on that perspective. While I may simplify this 1x coder problem, am I not creating a much more higher vector of skill sets that I need to manage this entire complicated infrastructure and have the governance framework and make the right decisions and intervene when needed?
The whole point is you're not getting rid of Ganesh. He's still there, right? You still need...
Sorry, Ganesh, we're just picking on you. I'm just sitting right.
I can see him. He's right in my eye.
Yeah.
But a term that's taken from the crypto world, which is an oracle, right? You've always have to have a human in the loop that can quantify these things themselves, right? You would never give code to a generative AI and just let it loose and then trust, because they do have biases, right? And it could be programmed with biases, or you could have prompt bias, meaning the way you ask it a specific question. I don't know if anyone saw it was a picture of the Pope in a puffy jacket. And the model itself should not allow for gore or things like that. So the prompt was, hey, cover him in strawberry jelly. And it covered him in strawberry jelly. And it looked like strawberry jelly. Make it darker. add some chunks, add some strawberries. And by the end of it, they prompt biased or prompt poisoned to make it look exactly like they wanted to and got around the rules. So here's two things. If you take away two things from this conversation about generative AI, these are it. They all have one or two things in common. They are completely naive and they are completely ruthless. So it's based off the prompts that you give them, and this is a new job that's been created, by the way. They're prompt engineers, right? So as it supplements the ability to code or do other things, just like you said, there are new jobs that are constantly being created to support, because it is complicated. The regulatory stuff around this it's a next level. You know, we've been navigating through bias and all these other things with non-generative AI for years. But now the copyright thing comes into play. I don't know if everyone saw the news where they're being sued because they used copyrighted data to make the decision, and they're trying to say that you can or can't do that, and that's what's going through the court systems now. And those will be hot topics for some kind of, for quite a while.
So one thing, one perspective, my perspective on use of, and not generative AI, but AI in general, to at least the blockchain world that I come from, 90% of all crypto trading is done by algo traders. There's no human being sitting behind this and doing trading. The industry was $3 trillion at one point. I gave some numbers yesterday, close to $7+ trillion worth of trading was done online. These are all done by bots, most of them. And I ventured into understanding the risk model framework around crypto. And this is, again, my experience with leveraging AI for my purposes and the complexity of implementing it for my purposes, was the fact that I needed to understand how do these bots make decisions in terms of trading. Of course, you can give them rules to say if you have this momentum happening, you can go and execute a trade or buy and sell depending on the threshold of the valuation of these assets that actually happen. But lion's share of, including the phenomenon that we had with GameStop, if you all remember that whole fiasco we had, these are all meme-driven trading patterns that actually are emerging. The question then became, for me, is how do I factor in the technical analysis, which is the actual analysis of an asset that performs its valuation, what is the price direction, which is a decision that we have to make when we buy and sell assets. Second thing you need to understand is, what is the Twitter thinking about this, which has never been a factor in the past. What is the sentiment analysis? How do I analyze the trending of a certain asset, even though the fundamentals don't add up? Like the numbers are completely out of the whack, but it's really trending up. Or what Elon Musk's at times have been tweeting about Dogecoin, which is completely farce of an asset. The question for me was, how can I use AI effectively? So I had a scoring mechanism. I had a weight mechanism to discern between what is the right trade that I can feed into a trading platform. And the challenge for me was, after exactly a month, I had to go back and retweak it because the world in crypto moves very fast. Things changed. I did the same thing for a payment network that I was building. And we had to look into this massive amount of data. So if you look at blockchain, if you look at our own transaction systems the way we use today, these are all linked transactions. Blockchain itself is chain of blocks. Block is nothing but a set of transactions. So I wrote a paper on this topic which looks into the fact that I have all these linked transactions, and how do data is there. In fact, blockchain is data rich. How do I apply the right technologies to be able to extract the right sort of tags, for example, in transactions, and make decisions based on where is the movement or price movement of this asset, how does it correlate to what's happening in a Twitter world or what's happening in Discord channels. And so I think the world around us is changing for why we move assets and why we move money. And I think that AI can be a powerful force in helping us understand that. And I'll say one more thing. The biggest challenge that I had in convincing our executives and convincing our clients is, if you don't have a data governance strategy, if you don't have a data strategy, you're not going to jump to AI if you don't have data strategy in place. Data is what feeds the AI models. So before you go down the AI path, to me, is let's talk about data. Are we using our internal data? Can we use that? Do we have clients? Do we own the data? Can we use that in a meaningful, with or without clients' consent? Is this transactional data? So you have all these data governance challenges. Of course, we have technical facets of data lakes, and we have snowflakes, and we have all these tools that allows us to organize the data. So data organization is a whole different thing, but if you don't have the right governance framework, then you can actually, the AI models can backfire on you because you don't have the right strategy in place, if that makes sense. So I'll pause. Again, any question?
Yeah, so what are the, let's say, 2 or 3 use cases that you're most excited about for your roadmap?
Should we let
Both
chat?
of you guys.
So I'll reiterate a few things and I'll tell you what I'm excited about. But I actually asked this question, and because it is an AI panel, you have to use AI at some point. And I don't just use ChatGPT for these things. I actually challenge it, and 90% of the time I don't use the stuff that comes out of it because it doesn't meet my needs per se as I'm writing articles and so on and so forth. So fraud detection prevention is one of them. Risk assessment management, customer experience enhancement, which is what was discussed in the last panel, automated payment processing, real-time fraud prevention, and the list goes on. There's about 12 of these things. My excitement, at least from the world that I come from, so I'm heavily focused on real-time payments, like movement of money in general, for not just settlement purposes, but also like DVP, the delivery versus payment, and payment versus payment, which is moving the money around the world is truly a challenging feat. And I think the last panelist said it's really simple. I would contest that it's not exactly simple. The process of moving money, everything around it is quite complicated. So my excitement there is, can I use AI efficiently in the model where I can detect fraud before it happens? So in the crypto world, you can create a wallet quite simply and easily. So when wallet gets created on the network, can I go into this model? I don't know if this may be too futuristic, but the Minority Report-like model to say this is going to happen, and the probability model of this account of engaging in fraudulent activity is very high. Because believe it or not, even today with all the tech that we have, I think only 45% of all the financial crimes are solved. This is money used for nefarious purposes, right? So my excitement there is if I can apply the real-time models to real-time payments, I think I've reached a point where we can really accelerate the speed of commerce. That's my exciting area, I think, but I'd love to get yours.
Everybody always talks about fraud. And what's funny to me about that one is Gen AI is not really that good at doing real-time fraud. Now you can have AI that's really, really good. So at Global, we've had our fraud tool, which is called Feature Space or Foresight Score, and it uses deep learning and machine learning, and it's been doing it for years. But for real time, meaning as these transactions are going through, if there's a lag in it, guess what? You miss it. So, but what you can do, like Nitin was saying, is leverage the Gen AI to come up with all these different scenarios, millions and millions of scenarios, and you can use it to augment the tools, the AI tools that you have today, and it gets better. It becomes more optimized, and then there's always, for me, it's the tech debt, being able to get rid of tech debt at this high pace. If you can go look, there's financial institutions that are going through modernization journeys today, and for them to get rid of that tech debt, it takes years and years and years and millions of dollars. If I can take that down and speed it up, that's one of my favorite use cases, hands down.
And one thing I absolutely detest about the previous use of AI is chatbots. They're the worst. I don't know how many of you agree with me. Like, people think it's saving a lot of money over time, and you're throwing away your customer relationship because these bots are only able to answer like 10 questions. You ask them something different and they pop up. And I think in some cases that the generative AI elements can be a bit more intelligent about those things. And I did work on those platforms back in the day, with IBM, in figuring out as to what the Watson platform was, in solving those key issues to say, can we go an extra layer? So again, if you hear the term generative AI or explainable AI or trusted AI, they're not huge, something different. Essentially, it's just a flavor and adding sort of a specialization to artificial intelligence, which basically is, let me calculate the data and let me be able to give you an output based on the question you ask, and that entire process, to oversimplify it, is the artificial intelligence piece. So I hope that answers the question. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'll add one comment to it. What we are seeing, at least the margin we supported what we do the business with, a lot of organizations are coming from the automation and generative AI to the back-end support, and that's where, usually things like, you will see enterprise level support, for example, is happening through generative AI. And when the leadership team is seeing the value coming through the efficiency within the organization, then I think it's moving to the front end of the piece. So I think as we do a co-pilot, this notion of co-pilot, it's really gaining a lot of momentum when you do the back end support efficiency.
Yeah.
And that's how we are seeing it in some of the organizations.
So when you say backend, you mean IT backend or?
Just anything, financial,
Got it.
operation efficiency, on a backend processes perspective.
Got it. Got it.
So even like, within it, like say, technology,
Yeah, yeah.
support is a good example.
I think that's a brilliant.
It's a great place to start, right?
I think it's a great way to start because one thing is when you start dealing with clients, which is bringing it that back office to front office stuff, and I do this day in, day out, and like, what can we do? If you're able to use AI to solve your own problems before you solve customers' problems, I think that's the best way to go because you don't have the regulatory hurdles and you don't have to explain the world that you're doing a few things for your own operational excellence and risk excellence that I think that's a great point.
And
I think that'd be a good way to go forward without actually getting into crosshairs with.
it's a great starting point.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, that's probably where you should start. And you can quantify it, right? So you know exactly what it takes to do these processes. You've been doing them for years, and you can quantify it. Leadership loves the ability to see it in numbers. And we are learning. This is a new tool, right? And we are learning. So if you have some type of event that you don't want, it minimizes the possibility of something bad happening. So that's a great place to start from a productization.
You had a question?
Yes, for Russell. Russell, you talked about creating business cases the same way that you would do for any traditional technology investment. I'm curious, a lot of this generative AI, any data-driven initiatives require multiple attempts for you to get perfection and predict exactly what is the outcome you are going to create. What do you guys follow in global parlance when you create technology investment requests using technology that is not completely proven? So how do you create this?
You have to prove it, right? So just like any other.
What is the approach? How do you guys do?
Yeah, so it takes, going through a POC and then making sure you have the framework, the architectural framework around it to support. It's absolutely necessary. You have to have it. And when I say the framework, I'm speaking about the legal, all the compliance things, all the things that if you don't address and get right in the very beginning before you even start doing the technology piece of it, it will fail, right? And it has the ability to be catastrophic to you and your business from a perspective of, if I get 8 years down the road and I'm using a third-party large language model that I can't vet out or quantify and don't have the legal aspects in it, and it comes out that they're using copyrighted material, you don't want that to happen, right? So you have to take all of those things into consideration when you're even just starting the journey into it. That's where you should start, is let us get this architectural framework put in place that will support this. Then you pull your models into it. Then you start training it. Then you can expand it out. But having that business value owner that can quantify, yep, that's the results I need. And also having some pension for it's going to fail, right? And it may not be as good to begin with. You remember, these things are learning. They're like small children that are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And now, my 16-year-old is way smarter than I am, but when she was 2, I could still get one over on her, barely. So that if you think of these models from that approach, that's a good place to start, and being very specific about the problem you're solving. Because we just want to be like, oh, generative AI will solve everything. No, it doesn't. That's not how it works. So, and then from a perspective of using large language models that exist today, you're now seeing this transition from these out in the wild large language models that are now enterprise versions. The enterprise versions have the ability to go back and audit. That's the key for those. Oh, I'm going to ingest it into my enterprise. I need to be able to go and say, this is why, or at least a very good reasoning of why it made that decision. Because we really can't, like ChatGPT 2, we were on 4, we're going to 4.5 now. They just launched the ability to put your information in there and have it speak on your behalf or in your voice, which is really, really neat. You should try it. But you have to be able to say, this is the data it was trained on. And we don't even know, we can't go to ChatGPT 2 right now and say, this is why, exactly 100% why it made that decision. We don't have that ability. But we can say, but this is what it was trained on. So you can alleviate those biases from that perspective. And then as you pull up, your other use cases, you could go from there. But you have to start. That business case has to be there. There has to be quantifiable results. And you have to be able to have all the architectural frameworks in place.
Thank you for that. Just to follow up, Nitin, you mentioned that early on your remark, you said companies have a lot of pilots and small experiments, but not a strategy around how to
Yeah.
about AI. If I connect back to what Russell is saying, companies want clear business case
Yeah.
for you to set up team.
Yeah.
But you can't create clear business case without experimenting.
Correct.
So how do you bridge that balance? How do you do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've been focusing on what they call foundational models because the process of, and for those of you who don't know, you should Google foundational models. The whole thing is how do you get ready-made learning and have a basic model which is industry specific. So industry specific meaning automotive versus payments versus security settlement and so on and so forth. So the foundation model is somebody's trained the basic framework to say this is the model that will solve you this problem. And that reduces the cost and time barrier. So if he's spending 6 months figuring all that out, foundation models give you accelerated discovery. And that gives you the model to say, I'm going to make this investment, I have this business problem. So we looked into this massive human cost of reconciliation around the financial system. Armies of humans are involved in using Excel spreadsheets and macros to reconcile with what's in core banking system and ledgers. And we looked into saying, can we automate this? Well, is automation good enough? Or do we need to take a step further to actually go towards a process where we can use artificial intelligence to be able to understand that if this update happened, is this update valid? Can this massive variance between the position of a certain security, can that happen? And that goes a step above automation. And that takes away, to me, it's simple use case of FTEs. You're able to save X amount of cost. That's the use case we made to say, can we simply go and reconcile first? Simple, stupid thing that we can do using AI. And that's the path that we took, which I'm assuming is something similar. They're looking at is, what is a big problem? And to your point early on, can I solve this for myself? So by solving that problem, I'm not only making it efficient, which comes secondary benefit, I'm saving this bunch of cost because I have 10,000 people involved in reconciling books, so to speak. So I know we've been picking on Ganesh Ram all day. I think we owe him for him to ask the last question.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
The question is around the sustainability of the intelligence of these models, right? So ChatGPT is so brilliant because the entire internet is sort of fed into it. But as we are becoming more close ecosystem, copyrights and all of that, the raw material that goes in is going to be, the volume is reduced. So how will the intelligence be sustained over the period of time?
So the programmer of the model has the ultimate power, right? And they are the ones that decide what it's trained on. You could train it on the entire internet, or you could train it on some Reddit types of processes. But ultimately, the sustainability of it is based off the ability for it to keep learning, and that's what it does. You could have personas, and what we're about to see, or actually, you can go look at it now. You have generative AI models that are personas. This one's a plumber. It thinks it's a plumber. It tries to plumb. You ask it plumbing questions. Yep, I don't know what this material is, so I need to create another persona that can tell me that that's granite. So that's going to be the perpetuation of it. You will have creative models, personas, that are creating more models to help it solve problems, right? And you need to be extremely careful. I don't know if everyone saw they asked generative AI to solve this problem, but it went against one of its core functions. So it's like, yep, can't do that, but a human can. So it contacted a human on Fiverr, paid them with Venmo to actually solve the problem for them. It's just a way around it. So just as we're making the sustainable models that can perpetuate, we need to be mindful that this thing's getting smarter, and it is creative.
And I would just add to that as last minute here is the economics will dictate you to go a sustainability route. So ChatGPT is what they call general learning. So you can ask it anything and it'll go and scrounge. Sometime I've asked the question about my article and it came back with my article in that. And so you do all these experiments. But there was a time when ChatGPT early days was burning $200,000 every hour. I don't think you can do that in your enterprise. You can't justify it. So you have to, that's why I look into foundational models. So foundation model is domain specific. It's a small swim lane. And it requires what they call as corpus. Corpus is the amount of data that you feed into for it to learn. And that'll itself promote sustainability. Like in my reconciliation use case, as I was describing to you, it's a simple use case. I don't need all of internet's information. I just need to be able to figure out the business process and simply be able to touch X amount of files and update the back office systems. I can take that automation to the next level and don't have to spend $100,000 an hour that ChatGPT is burning when it launched early days because of the load that it got from the entire world. So I think that sustainability, I think economics will drive the sustainability automatically because no one has, chipsets are quite expensive to handle the AI workloads, I think. But
Right
with
now,
that,
right now, the burn rate for ChatGPT a day is $644,444.
sell that to your
Yeah, so-
budget office.
As we close out with 2 seconds, as you're building these strategies out, keep that in mind, that click, that compute does cost something. It's not, nothing's free, and this is the same.
We could talk for hours, but thank you again for being such a good audience, and thanks for all the questions. Makes it fun.